Hello, I'm Taya and I'm here to teach you a little bit about art history. Today we will be going over 50 art history facts. Before becoming a famous Impressionist painter, Claude Monet was a popular caricaturist under the name Oscar Monet. His original caricatures sold for around 10 to 20 francs. In 2019, one of the sketches was sold for $37,575 in New York. Rembrandt used a variety of signatures throughout his career, including RHL, RHL Van Rijn, and finally, a simple Rembrandt. Paolo Veronese painted the largest oil painting of the 16th century at 5.6 by 13.1 meters. The piece originally depicted the Last Supper, but the artist went overboard with people and animals, which the Catholic Church didn't like very much. Some historians believe that Johannes Vermeer used a camera obscura for his paintings as, even without an outline, he created a near-perfect perspective. Louis Wain's anthropomorphised cats were inspired by his late wife's cat, Peter. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the highest form of oil painting was history painting, which was imagined depictions of mythological events and from literature. The name of the Pre-Raphaelites comes from the idea of the Renaissance artist Raphael being the height of artistic development. They believed Raphael's work was grandiose with disregard of the simplicity of truth. Their group focused on the purity of the natural world and individual morality. During the medieval period, iconoclasm in Europe destroyed hints of pagan civilization. As of today, Marcus Aurelius on horseback is one of the only surviving Roman bronze statues. Andy Warhol's 1962 Campbell's Soup collection comes in a set of 32 silk-screened canvases, each representing the 32 separate soup varieties that the company sold at the time. Due to his lack of instructions, curators of the Museum of Modern Art in New York hung them chronologically in manufacturing order. While the Olympics now showcase exclusively sporting events, between 1912 and 1948, medals were awarded for sport-inspired architecture, sculpture, musical talent, paintings, and works of literature. The Pieta is the only piece of work that Michelangelo ever signed. He believed this was a display of pride, never signing a work again. Vermeer's girl with a pearl earring is actually not a portrait, but a tronie. This is a Flemish Baroque figure that is used to convey emotion or allegory. Tronies are typically found in generic pictures of elderly people to examine those of old age, or figures laughing and pulling dramatic expressions. The oldest known animal painting in the world was discovered in a cave in Indonesia. It is a painting of a wild pig from 45,500 years ago. Ultramarine blue was an extremely expensive pigment throughout history, so many patrons requested it to be used for the robes of the Virgin Mary, showing the level of devotion and expense the patron gave towards the creation of the work. There are 5 different versions of the Scream by Edvard Munch. Elizabeth Vigée Lebrun painted more than 30 portraits of Marie Antoinette over a 6-year period before fleeing during the French Revolution. It is recorded that the old Venetian master Titian lived to over 100 years old, living from 1474 to 1576. In his life, he is known to have created 400 paintings, of which 300 survived. The term Art Deco can be traced back to the 1925, following the International Exhibition of Modern Decorative and Industrial Arts in Paris. Within the exhibition, there was a focus on style moderne, popularly becoming shortened to Art Deco. To capture his own dreams, Salvador Dali would go to sleep with a heavy key in his hand. As he fell into a deep sleep, the key would drop from his hand into a plate. This would wake him up and he would quickly record what he had experienced in his dreams. It was a trend during Georgian times to commission a painting of the eye of a family member, child, friend, or lover. They were called eye miniatures. Jacques-Louis David's The Death of Marat depicts the demise of a revolutionary leader and friend of the artist. David was part of the National Convention and had previously voted for the death of Louis XVI. His depiction of Marat composes him in the same style and lighting expected of a religious martyr. The FAYUM mummy portraits date back to between the 1st and 3rd centuries. Dozens of these portraits exist thanks to a consistently hot and dry Egyptian climate, with bright colours surviving due to their tempera and wax-based. In 2018, a lost portrait of Charles Dickens was discovered in a trinket box during an auction in South Africa. The miniature, by Margaret Gillies, had not been seen for 175 years. Paul Cézanne was a perfectionist when it came to his art. The French Impressionist painter would get so stressed with his work that he was often known to rip up canvases and destroy them. Frida Kahlo's reputation as an artist had grown to such an extent after her death that Mexico declared her works part of the national culture heritage. This prohibited their export from the country, making their appearance at auctions and retrospective exhibitions very rare. Marietta Robusti was known as Tintoretto as she was the favourite daughter of Renaissance master Tintoretto. She worked in her father's studio, and his discipline in work after her death is attributed to his grief in losing her. Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights was sometimes referred to as the strawberry painting throughout history due to the predominance of the fruit in this composition. Gustav Klimt never painted a self-portrait, stating, "I'm less interested in myself as a subject for a painting than I am in other people, above all women. There is nothing special about me. I'm a painter who paints day after day from morning to night. Whoever wants to know something about me ought to look carefully at my pictures." The pigments or dyes in Japanese woodblocks prints can begin to fade in low levels of light. When Hokusai's The Great Wave were displayed at the British Museum, research suggested that if these prints were displayed for just 3 months at 50 lux, they would have to be stored in the dark for at least a year before being exposed again. When they were displayed, it was only for 20% of the time to only dim amount of light. When they were displayed, it was only for 20% of the time. In 1976, Georgia O'Keeffe refused to lend her work to a major exhibition called Women Artists 1550 to 1950. Her reasoning was that she was not one of the best female artists, but one of the best painters of all time. The painted ceiling of the Sistine Chapel took Michelangelo 4 years to complete. Manet's famous painting Olympia is his modern take on Titian's Venus of Urbino. As well as the courtesan's nudity, Manet's inclusion of an orchid, a black cat, and a bouquet of flowers were all recognised as symbols of her sexuality. Ivory artworks can be sold in the UK if it has been carved before 1947. This is also the case for restored ivory, where any new elements that include real ivory cannot have been added post-1947. Joan Miro and Joseph Royo's World Trade Center tapestry was one of the most expensive and culturally important artworks to have been lost during the events of 9/11. Other artworks lost during the event include over 300 casts of Rodin sculptures and portraits by Cindy Sherman. Paper mache can be dated back to the Han Dynasty in China, 200 AD, and was used not only for decorative purposes but to craft helmets. Across the rest of the Asian continent, it can be found on shields and armour. A drawing in the Royal Collection by Raphael shows one of Leonardo's lost masterpieces, LEDA and the Swan. Raphael adapted the pose for his own painting of St. Catherine of Alexandria. Peter Lely's portraits were extremely popular, to the point a system was put in place to help his studio produce hundreds of paintings. Lely would take notes of the facial features and hands of his subject, and they were placed in a numbered set of poses to be finished by the studio assistants. The famous collages by Henri Matisse were due to him being bedbound in 1941 following surgery. Unable to paint and sculpt as he had before, he took to using scissors and paper instead. This medium has since become a defining part of his work. Gustave Courbet was imprisoned for political reasons in Paris, where he was allowed to paint but without any models to pose for him. This is where he composed a famous series of still life paintings of flowers and fruit instead of his usual figurative art. The very first abstract works in Western art history are attributed to Hilma af Klint, a 19th century Swedish mystic and artist who used complex spiritual ideas in her work. She was often inspired by group seances. La Magia Desnuda by Francisco Goya is referred to as the first life-size female nude in Western art history without any allegorical or mythological symbolism. The painting was never exhibited in his lifetime. It was confiscated from its original owner by the Spanish Inquisition for being too obscene. Egon Schiele died during the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, 3 days after his pregnant wife. In the days in between their deaths, he drew sketches of her. Edgar Degas' friendship with Mary Cassatt ended due to their clashing political views. Degas was an outspoken anti-Semite with no support for women's rights. Cassatt later expressed satisfaction at the irony of his works being exhibited in aid of women's suffrage. Jackson Pollock began numbering his paintings instead of naming them to evade the viewer's need to look for figurative elements in his work. Whistler's Mother was originally seen as a failure in artistic experimentation as the simple setting and colour palette clashed with the sentimentality and far more flamboyant tastes of Victorian society. The Velázquez masterpiece Las Meninas is one of his many portraits of Infanta Margarita Teresa. There were numerous depictions of Margarita Teresa throughout her childhood to document her appearance. These were often sent to her uncle, who would later become her husband. Portrait painter to George Washington, Rembrandt Peale, was from an artistic family. His siblings were also named after old masters, with names such as Rubens, Angelica Kauffman, Raphael, Sophonisba Anguissola, and Titian Ramsay. Jan van Eyck was the only 15th century Netherlandish painter to sign his canvases. Hokusai's The Great Wave is said to be the most reproduced artwork in the world. It can be found on everything from clothing and shoes to technology and household goods. The original woodblock print was made around 1831. Michelangelo's father was horrified when he found out that he would decide to become an artist. Michelangelo was beaten by his father and uncles when he first began to draw. His father was proud of his ancestry, and he was worried that an artist in the family would bring the family a disgrace. Thank you for watching.